Today's episode is for every CIO and leadership team that's ever felt this frustration. You invested in ERP to create stability, and somehow it became the thing that slows the business down. My guest today, Tim Faith, a fractional CIO and digital leader who's been challenging one of the biggest assumptions in enterprise tech, that ERP has to be monolith. In Tim's recent work on Composable ERP, he highlights a problem many organizations are living through right now: persistent business and IT misalignment, rising dissatisfaction with ERP outcomes, and the programs that technically go live but never truly deliver the business value they promised. Tim's view is clear. ERP can't stay static. It needs to become a modular platform of capabilities, flexible enough to evolve with strategy, integrate AI and analytics, and avoid the endless rip and replace cycle. So today, we're diving into the Composable ERP, the CIO's escape plan from monolithic ERP pain. We'll talk about what composable really means in practice, how leaders create guardrails so modular doesn't become chaos, and how CIOs can reshape the narrative so ERP is seen as a lever for business agility and not a technology project. Tim, welcome to the ERP Perspective. Great to have you on the show. Good afternoon, Tim. It's great to have you on the ERP Perspective. How are you doing today?
Well, first of all, love the Christmas season. So generally happy. And then anytime I get to talk about ERP, that gets me going at a 112%. So first of all, I got to say thank you for having me on. Thank you for just doing the ERP perspective to get the word out about what ERP can be and should be. So thanks for that.
No worries at all, Tim. I know we've been speaking for some time, and when we first had our very first conversation, I just loved your story, and I thought there was so much value that you could bring to the community in terms of your experience in ERP, your journey. And I know I've done an introduction already in terms of Composable ERP and what we'll be speaking about today, but I think it'd be great to start with, who is Tim Faith?
Oh, Tim Faith is father, husband, grandfather, lover of all things ERP, and a kind of an addict of chocolate chip cookies. But I've been involved in IT for about 35 years, and within ERP specifically for 30 years, going back to the change from mainframe into client server technology back in the very early days of PeopleSoft version 4, right? It's pretty amazing. And I've been functional architect, technical architect, practice lead, business director, vice president of business systems. I've used it, I've implemented it, and I just love the whole topic of ERP.
That's exactly why we wanted you on the show. And I know you've written a fantastic article around Composable ERP, and I know that the topic or the title of this episode was a Composable ERP, the CIO's escape plan from monolithic ERP pain. Why did you want to go into that, and what does that mean to you?
Well, I think that there's a pain point around ERP, and it gets to this idea that CIOs, they want to just put in ERP. They think there's this big chunk of something called ERP, and they want to get the right one. You know, you got to get the right brick, but you got to put that into your architectural stack and then just let it go, which, Brown White, that was probably a very valid point because it ran for 20 years. And that is not exactly the way business happens right now. Just, so many once in a lifetime events have happened over the past 5 to 10 years. We've had the advent of cloud. We've had pandemics, supply chain disruptions, tariffs, trade wars, things like that. And so CIOs, they're faced with having to change according to the business. Well, when you've got this big old block that just kind of gets stuck, and it's a pain point. Well, what do you do with it? Well, you can try to just chisel around and rip out that block, which is kind of expensive. It's very spendy. And then you just try to put the same, maybe a prettier block right back where it was. Or maybe possibly a CIO can start looking at, well, what does the business actually need? What is our business? And so in some ways it forces this idea of composable ERP. It forces the change to just looking at it from a technology standpoint to looking at it from a business standpoint and saying, instead of trying to force the business into a technology, say, what technology best serves the business? Yeah. Does that make sense? That's the starting point. That's the thesis of all of it.
From your experience, how have you, in a short summary, how have you managed to do that for different businesses and different people?
Sure. Well, I will say this, that there is no magic bullet when it comes to ERP, other than the right processes and the right people. The technology it's fantastic technology. Do you know technology, integration technology, data technology, application technology? There's some magic in there, right? It is fantastic. I love the technology, but there's no magic bullet because you can start looking at, for example, I've worked within a transportation industry. You think, okay, that's interesting. Well, you start breaking it up. You look at marine transportation and the way that it moves things along waterways, the fact that you have these disconnected barges and tugboats and ships and people kind of going all over. Well, that's one form of transportation. Then you look at the busing industry, public transportation. They would have different needs around the way that they have way that they manage their assets, the buses. And then you go into trucking industry. And so you have, that's different. That's even within the transportation industry in large, you have these different subsections. And so the needs of them, each one of those businesses would be very different. They still have people, they still have money, but the way that they do their assets, the way that they manage their materials, vastly different.
Mm.
And so when you look at ERP, I like to say step away from it and think of it not just as the technology, but this conglomeration of business processes. And it's really around four key enterprise resources. I mean, it's
Mhm.
kind of funny. It's right there in the name, enterprise resource planning. So you want to plan around your finances, your people, your supply or your materials, and then your assets. And the way that you then use that and translate that into workflows represents your business. And business is always going to change. You know, one trucking company may buy a smaller competitor and they
Yeah.
do things a little bit different. So now you've got to merge that workflow into your existing workflow and your data, their data into your existing data to actually have some really good process. Or a marine transport company may want to start looking at some other additional services
Mhm.
that the big block of ERP may not be able to provide. So now they need to add on additional workflows around field service. So when you think of it in that way, just like you want to compose the workflows and transform the business, add on business, change the business, compose the business, you
Mhm.
want the same digital architecture that allows integration and data management, and most importantly, in all of that, security. At the
Mhm.
same time, visibility to then be able to say, I need to run my business better. So the business, the CFO definitely wants to be able to do that.
Mhm.
CHRO definitely wants to be able to do that. CEO, operations, they all want to be able to change the business as needed, but have the stability when needed. So they look to the CIO and they say, hey, CIO, can you work some magic for us? And that's where this idea of composable ERP really came from.
I mean, I was going to say, obviously, many organizations, or we've seen in the last couple of years, all these organizations just go all in on that large, all-in-one ERP platform,
Right.
expecting that stability and, oh, we can just scale with it. Yet most of them are feeling slower and more constrained than ever before. I know you mentioned that kind of from a CIO perspective, why a monolithic ERP is now, holding businesses back. I mean, is there anything else from a CIO perspective why that's happening?
Oh, see, this is why your podcast rocks because you had really good questions. You have these really good conversations.
Yeah.
I got to admit, there's those two magic letters
Mm.
that everyone is involved isn't concerned about right now, and that's
Mm.
artificial intelligence, AI,
Yeah.
and whether that's represented as agents or just workflows, hyper automation. Well, the business leaders, and actually, even quite honestly, the business users themselves, whether it's in supply chain, whether it's asset management, finance, people, HR, common users, they're looking to say, well, what can artificial intelligence do for me without replacing me? And
Mm.
now the CIO, they are being urged to explore and say, what can artificial intelligence do for us? Well, going back to our initial thesis, the argument that the monolithic ERP is actually a hindrance, when you have this big block, it's really hard to then get into the workflows and say, well, how can we then extract the right data or observe the right workflows and maybe change it and automate a lot of this? However, with a more composable architecture that's centered around integration and data management and security and visibility and analytics, you can now be able to take that, maybe an agent, and onboard an agent in a very safe way and do some exploration to say, does this make our business better? Can we possibly maybe insert an agent when it comes to travel and expense? It's something fairly harmless there. Insert that into travel expense and be able to have some fraud detection or some duplication detection. or make the process faster. Everyone wants faster, but they don't necessarily want to be replaced. So maybe now the CIO says, well, if we put that into play, we put this agent into play, is it safe? Is it faster? Is it better for the business? And they contact all the various people that are involved, say, all right, so if we made it better and faster, more secure, how can we benefit the people better? So when you look at this more composable architecture, it allows it to be able to say, let's test, let's hypothesize around onboarding an AI agent. Let's onboard a data lake, or let's transform to a data lake. Let's have a way to be able to onboard and offboard this artificial intelligence to see, does it actually work for us? And then if it does, what are the business implications and how can we make our business better?
100%. I mean, I think most of the time, Composable ERP is misunderstood as just more integrations, but
Right.
it's far more than that. And the businesses need people like yourselves that can articulate that to different executives, different business leaders, and actually break it down for what it means.
Back when I was with Gardner, when we started exploring composable ERP, and we'd call it different things like packaged business capabilities, or we built on postmodern ERP, and we thought, well, what's the next thing? And we came up with this, we coined this term composable ERP, and I was the lead author for that. We got a lot of questions. Well, what's different than postmodern ERP? What's different than best of breed? But what happened is, as we described, there are times when the larger chunks, the vendors that provide the more wider capabilities around finance or asset management, or they blend them all together and they do a really good job with the workflows around maybe an order to cash or procure to pay or, uh, a promise to order, things like that. They do really good workflows, and absolutely, let's take those larger chunks of software, but let's still have an architecture that is focused in on integration that allows you to, it's overstating it to say simply swap in and out, but you kind of
Yeah.
get the idea that with cloud software, you no longer have an asset in your data center. And
Mhm.
so, yeah, there's some ways to be able to have some, uh, if you want to call it, layers of
Yeah.
applications that can be taken in and out. Some of these may be monetized. So
Yeah.
this idea of composable ERP is get as many vendors as gives you the flexibility, but as few vendors as actually fit the need. You don't necessarily go best of breed just because it's best of breed. Just because templates said, "Oh, go crazy with integration. Integration is magic and will fix." That's crazy talk. And even I would say, don't go to get 100 applications just
Mhm.
because you have 100 business problems.
Yeah.
But I would say, not there's no one magic bullet. There's
Yeah.
no one magic solution. You can't wave the magic with the one magic wand. So what you do is you find the things that actually benefit the business, but the composable architecture centered around integration and data management then allows you to change afterwards
Mhm.
because, maybe your business is so great, they say, let's buy competitors or
Mhm.
let's do new things. Let's investigate Internet of Things. Let's start getting field services involved and branch out into new things. And so again, this whole idea of composable ERP, let's find the right solutions. And if many solutions come from one vendor, fantastic.
Yeah.
But don't constrain yourself to that.
Well, I was just going to say, I think the approach is trying to make the ERP or the business as agile as possible
Right.
and as efficient as possible, but not making it too complicated by adding on too many different parts when it's not needed. So it's trying to find that perfect balance or that perfect sweet spot, if you'd like to call it that.
Absolutely. You get it. See,
Yeah.
that the thing is that you need some sort of mediation in the middle, whether it's the data or the data model. And this is what's really interesting now with some of the artificial intelligence and things like MCP servers, because if you decide to pursue multiple vendors, because maybe for your treasury management, there's one vendor that is so good and you love it and it does exactly what you need. And maybe if you're a professional services firm and maybe there's maybe a certain part of scheduling that, your basic, your foundational ERP system does not do it. So maybe you need some very interesting approach to scheduling and you add on something there. It's still ERP because it's taking the way that you manage that key resource of people and
Mhm.
apply them to your business. So it's
Mhm.
still ERP, this the scheduling part.
Yeah.
Well, you want to be able to have the context of that because uh, for example, I just mentioned lover of chocolate chip cookies, right? You say cookie to me, I automatically think one thing. You say cookie to maybe a CTO and they think, oh, it's some things on the website that you've got to alert people to, and people are scared of clicking that thing that says accept all about cookies, right?
Yeah.
So context, you got to have the right context. And so you got to be able to have a composable architecture that does that translation and contextualization between the data of one thing. Because when you say cookies in one thing and cookies in another thing, you got to make sure that you're talking about the right type of thing,
Yeah.
the similar understanding, the similar context. And so
Um,
that's why the composable architecture really fits the need of the business,
yeah.
because it can address this multifaceted approach, but still make the data contextual.
And I know sort of ERP transformations as a whole are notorious for being expensive.
Oh.
Um, Quite a lot of time being disruptive as well in a way. And but how do you believe the composable approach is going to help organizations sort of evolve capabilities and without that sort of process of maybe repeating massive rip and replace programs or that different approach? How can a composable ERP approach change that?
So how much time do we have? No, this is why people listen to you. You got the good questions. So here's the thing is that as part of the research, it's not just Gartner research. You look all over, about 70% of ERP, if you want to call them implementations or transformations, are not doing it.
Mm,
No, they're actually not transforming. And the reason for that is that they're really not addressing the business need. Because the business may say, well, everything in our supply chain is fantastic. Everything in our production and our logistics, fantastic. But because of our growth and our scale, and we've added on new plants, we got controllers all over, and now our chart of accounts is out of hand. We need to we need to focus in on our finance. Just for
mm,
example, this has actually happened in my life. Right? They really want to focus in on changing finance, but yet because of the monolithic structure, the big block of ERP, they got ripped the whole thing out when the
mm,
problem was only in finance. So when you look at it from a composable aspect, you start looking at what are the business problems? How do we need to be better as a business? Is it finance? Well, then maybe we start looking at the back end architecture, start looking at how can we maybe decompose out finance from this, put in a new finance solution. Well, what is the ripple effect? Is there a change in the supply chain? Does that help supply chain get faster? Because now if we have finance that is better, whether it's because of the chart of accounts, or maybe now we can accelerate the payment model. Now we can change our supply chain with the payment terms in which we're engaging our supply chain. And we can change those suppliers. Maybe look at new suppliers and how that's benefit us. Okay. Maybe that now changes how we engage within supply chain and procure to pay and all that.
yeah.
And so one solution in one business area may lead to improvement in others, or if there's no impact, then you leave that. And then, until the next business problem comes up.
Yeah.
So that's
I mean,
really the essence, the oeuvre of the composable ERP is you really target solving the relevant business problem.
so I mean, what one analogy would be, you're driving a car and let's say you have one flat tire, you wouldn't then just buy a whole new car.
Oh no.
One of the tires is, got a puncture or something like that. Try and address the problem and then just scrapping the whole program or the whole car in that's analogy.
Oh,
Um,
fantastic. Exactly. Yes. I'm going to have to use that because that is a fantastic analogy.
as a free one.
I like that. I hope that's free.
I know you mentioned obviously one of the biggest ERP failures is that misalignment between the business goals and the business fit and also the system design. How does composable ERP help CIOs keep technology tightly aligned with the challenging business strategy?
Well, it allows the CIO to then focus on some of the technology, the foundation. And what
Mm,
is really the foundation? Does it have to be the ERP system or the data? The data itself, because everything's about data, whether
mm,
it's artificial intelligence about data, the intelligence, the business intelligence itself is dependent on the data. And that depends on integration. And so, telling CIOs that with all this different automation and there's so many things that they don't have to build on their own. They can open source things, but we could debate that. That could be a whole other podcast about open source ERP and open source technology. But yeah, you can open source things, or you can buy some really great dependable vendors. And so the technology itself can do the magic for you. So
mhm,
if you have a lot more automation, if you have artificial intelligence for building code, building integrations, you got open source, you can reduce down, you can be a really good business partner as the CIO and reduce down costs that way. So now
mm,
if you've got more time, and you've got more money. Now you can take your magicians, those technical experts around certain business processes, because maybe they're aligned in an agile way towards a procure to pay product or a order to cash product or something like that. Just align them towards a certain workflow, a value chain, if you will. See, how can we embed more value in this? Well, the only way to understand value is to then go to the business and say, all right, where is their value? How do we engage this value? Because we've got some time now. We've got a lot more automation within our technology. And so what can we do for you better? Can we reduce your cost? Can we reduce the cost of goods sold? Can we accelerate our transport so we get something faster to the end customer and possibly even get better terms, get
Mhm.
faster payment, be able to get that payment in our door and then be able to invest that into more supply, more materials, or change our assets. And
Mhm.
so from a CIO perspective, if you've got things like artificial intelligence, automation, and really good integration tools, and integration platform as a service, and you no longer have to go into your own data center, make sure that your servers are up and running and cool and working efficiently. If you can remove some of that, now you can dedicate your people and dedicate your time and dedicate that valuable business know-how to then go into the business and say, let's get better. Because they are frustrated, quite honestly. If you look at all the data and all the research, they're frustrated because they want better tools, but they don't know what tools they want. They
Mhm.
don't know how to engage that. And so the tools obviously are going to be technology. The CIO, the CTO, they're the ones that are going to be able to say, let's evaluate the tools. So from a CIO perspective, engaging the business, this composable idea allows them to say, hey, let's target your strategy. Let's understand your strategy. Help me understand your strategy so that I can be better for you. And all these other pressure, let's
Mhm.
start relieving them because now we can have better business processes and we enable them with our technology. They run a business of information and technology. And sometimes they're called CTOs, CIOs, however they're addressed, but their business is providing better technology and providing the information to the business. And
Mhm.
so when you look at the big block of ERP, that it's a big sunk cost. A lot of times people think, and they don't want to touch it. They want to have stability, not agility. They don't want to have change. But the market forces, I mean, we've seen the market forces even this year, and not only in the US, all over the world, market forces are forcing business changes. And
Mhm.
so you've got a CIO that then says, if I can make a more adaptable, modular, composable architecture that
Mhm.
allows me to have maybe a data lake,
Mhm.
integration platform as a service. If I can take some of this hardware out of my data center, offload that to some very good service providers that are able to do that, whether it's application services, whether it's cloud software as a service, maybe it's our infrastructure as a service, all these other things. It relieves them of the pressure and the day-to-day operation of something. So now they've got people who are available to start addressing the business problems. They've
Mhm.
been able to engage all the magic on the back end. They're reducing their costs that way. Now they
Mhm.
can say, I've got people who have time. I've got a little bit of money. Let's start investing that as instead of just being the business of the CIO, let's be the business partner for the CFO, for the operations officer, for the supply chain officer, for the operations manager, for the plant manager. How can we now take this extra time that we have and
Mhm.
start delivering true value, not just ROI on my investment, but make
Mhm.
that ROI overall? Then the CIO becomes the valued business partner. And I've seen this so
Mhm.
many times where this invisible digital wall
Mhm.
between the users. They say, hey, got a problem, let's just put it into service now. Let's toss it over the digital wall and IT will work their magic. And all of a sudden there'll be a fix in a day or two or a month or a year. Right?
Mhm.
Let's be more engaging with the business to make them better. That way we become more valuable.
Yeah.
And it's overall, it drives the better workflows, better business, and makes the CIO that much more valuable.
Yeah. 100%. The communication improves and the efficiency of the whole business at all levels it can improve from that. I mean, one thing I will say, I mean, some critics obviously worry about the composability can create complexity and what sort of governance guardrails around data integration, security, and vendors are essential to keep a composable ERP environment controlled and also scalable.
Governance is something that is often lost. And I alluded it to it before where the business, the user community, it's almost like the people who use the technology, they throw problems over the wall, the digital wall, through the fresh desk, the ServiceNow, whatever it is, the help desk technology. They say, all right, I've got a problem, fix it. Don't bother me, just get it fixed. Well, within a composable architecture and the governance, you need to have engagement at multiple layers. Obviously, you need the executives. You need to be able to executive engagement to understand what is the business strategy. Do they know their business strategy? Do they know their metrics? If they've never seen the metrics before, then as a CIO, how can I provide them the information that is relevant to them to build the metrics so they can actually observe the business and have better business planning? Because isn't that what ERP really is? It's enterprise resource planning. And you've got to be able to plan around those four key enterprise resources. Again, the finances, the people, the supply or the materials, and then the assets. Those four key resource areas. You got to plan for all that. That's what enterprise resource planning is. So if you can give them the data, then start having these target metrics. Now the business can start operating very strategically, not blind. So governance is aligning the idea of the business strategy. Where are we going business strategy? Having a roadmap of the business targets for the next year, 2 years, 3 years. But you've got those metrics, but then how are we going to make that secure? Are there ways for training? Are there ways for implementing multi-factor authentication? Is there other types of security involved? Is there compliance with these new regulations? Where are we going to know those regulations from? This is where maybe the legal counsel needs to be involved, or the business leaders of the various business units. They understand the implications of these new laws and regulations. That's why the CIO needs to be engaged in them to make sure we're compliant with that, because audits, I've been involved in one of those types of audits before. It's cruel. And when you fail one, whoo, it is a heck of a lot. Right. So you got that. So at that high level, you got to know whether compliance, governance, regulations. That's why you need to involve the business people, because they'll understand that. And then they'll say, hey, how can we make sure that that's embedded across our entire enterprise? But then all the various business function, you have that next level down, maybe the director level, manager level, their day-to-day operations. Well, you've got to be able to make sure that they're trained, that even in the discrete workflows that are going on, they've got there's changes that need to happen. Maybe it's security change. Maybe somebody leaves and you've got to temporarily or permanently take on their role. Well, how do you make that safe? Well, so all this governance, this communication to ensure the business is free of risk, but still able to pursue new opportunities and change as business changes or as the environment changes. Not necessarily how can we be roadblocks just to be a roadblock's sake. It's how can we communicate well with the business to enable them to pursue better business and to understand where they are with their business, but still keep them safe and mitigate the risk.
I was going to say, as a fractional CIO, you come into these projects. What are the main methodologies or techniques, let's say, do you have to make people feel more confident when doing this?
I like to bring in not just the quote unquote agile methodologies, but some of the true agile methodologies. If you look at Spotify method, you look at Scrum of Scrum, Lean Scrums. I prefer myself the scaled agile framework for enterprises. I think it lends itself very well. There's a certain amount of process that is involved with that particular scaled agile framework. But I like to introduce that into ERP organizations, organizations that are doing ERP. And then I say, let's focus on the value chain itself. Let's not focus and say, well, our product is SAP, because as an organization, SAP is a great product. There's many levels of great product there. But no organization wants to be the best SAP shop ever. No one wants to be the best Microsoft shop ever, the best Workday shop ever. What they want to be is the shop that wastes the least amount of time fulfilling customers' order. They want to be about that. And so this whole idea of the order to cash. So let's start looking at order to cash as our product. And let's start aligning our business analysts, or if you want to call them product managers or product owners or process owners, let's start aligning people to that. And we will operate on making order to cash more efficient and more valuable. And start embedding, let's look for opportunities to embed value into order to cash or procure to pay, because we want to be the best shop at paying our people, reimbursing expenses, optimize the way that we pay our suppliers. Maybe we can get better terms or discounts or things like that. So we can start observing that. So one of the things that I like to do is start changing the culture and changing the idea that our ERP is more about our collection of business processes around the 4 key resource areas. And our ERP is not Workday. It's not as fantastic as Workday is, as fantastic as Oracle and PeopleSoft and eBusiness Suite and Fusion and SAP and QAD and Acumatica. There's some fantastic technology out there, but our ERP is about the way that we align our resources to serve our customers and produce better business. And that's one of the things that, as a fractional CIO, I bring to that. I say, technology team, we're aligning to this to better serve this, because this is what the business cares about. They don't care about if we win a shop that says, hey, yeah, we are the best SAP shop. We've reduced down the amount of code, of custom code to this. They don't care. They care, can we deliver better order?
And my final question, if you were designing an ideal ERP landscape for a business, starting today, balancing that speed, control, innovation, and cost, what would that composable model look like? And how could leaders begin the journey? And I know you've sort of gone into a little bit already on terms of sort of picturing that ideal ERP landscape, but I mean, would we like to finish that part off? But also, where do leaders begin? How do they approach it, or your ideal view?
Every single ideal ERP has to be aligned to what the business does, how they bring in money, how do their people operate. Because an ideal ERP landscape for, say, a global security firm is going to be very different than an ideal landscape from, say, local city government. Both ERP, both have enterprise resources, both have people that they try to place at different places and collect time and all. And there's a lot of similarities in process, but at scale with the amount, I mean, if I'm a global security firm, I'm offering maybe 20, 30 different services in the realm of security. And some of them are billed hourly. Some of them are contracted out and I get retainers, and it's just a way different way of collecting money. Whereas from a city, I'm probably getting more of my revenue from taxes. And that's how I'm observing my revenue. And that's how I'm then taking that tax money in a responsible manner and applying that to then paying my people to be out somewhere. So really the ideal ERP landscape starts with understanding the business processes and saying, I'm going to start with making sure that I can integrate whatever solutions I need to. And it's multi-pronged approach. It may be an integration platform as a service. It could be open source, or it could be something that you buy. A lot of data management involved. Security is a huge thing. It's funny. I'm working with this ExoChain Foundation about AI governance, and all the security involved there. It's crazy. The potential security or intrusion vectors that are available within artificial intelligence. So if you want to apply that, but just the idea of security and governance around all these. So you've got to be able to have the foundation is more than just identifying the right vendor. It's identifying, well, do I have this foundational security? Because if I now start chasing after a really great vendor that does finance and people in one continuous model, value to me, because it's less integrations that I have to rewrite from whole, but I've got the right integration approach, the right integration strategy. So we've got that, and then you get the data management, because you got to be able to observe the analytics, observe the data flow. You got to be able to have do you want big chunks of data moving back and forth, or do you want to have event streaming models where triggering one flows data, pieces of data, changes the state of data into a central model, and then distributes it to the end state of another model in another application. So you've got all that. You've got security. You've got also a really good user experience, because from a CIO perspective, a lot of times, as much as various applications may bring better value, most users say, well, I can't control, or I can't understand that many different passwords. And you don't want them, doing the sticky note on, this line of sticky notes off the side of their monitor, right? And so they ask, well, actually, can I have a unified experience, a UI, Slack, Teams, something else? And so now you say, well, maybe I start approaching this from a headless perspective. And I start integrating with their devices, their phones, and have a lot of mobile apps or Teams or Slack, and say, how do I actually want them to engage with the data, with the information, with the process? Does it have to be in the ERP application or the PSA application or the supply chain application? So this ideal model, there is not one. It's what does the business need? How do I handle the user experience, the integration, the data, the security? Probably a whole lot more we can go into. There's a lot more. Well, still enabling the right flow of finance and people, assets, and supply. So those are really the key technology to business perspectives they've got to be able to have. So from an ideal perspective, ideal for the CIO, they can manage that, enable better across all those enterprise resources and still fulfill their obligations from a technology perspective. That is really the ideal landscape. I don't think there's really one that says you got to have Workday and Microsoft and Azure and Amazon all weave together. Nah, that doesn't exist.
You described it perfectly earlier in the episode when you said there's no silver bullet to ERP. There's not one size fits all, and it's all case by case, and different businesses need different services and different ERP systems, or that composable ERP solution could be perfect for them. But I just want to say thank you so much for coming on to the ERP Perspective. And I mean, anybody watching the episode, I'd highly recommend connecting with Tim. If you've got some availability in 2026 for new customers?
I do. If you go out to my website, I hope it's okay to plug it, CIO Unlimited. Yeah, CIOunlimited.com. It's kind of catchy, kind of cool, CIO Unlimited. But go out to CIOunlimited.com and you can reserve some time to talk to me. I do have some availability. I'll be onboarding another client soon, but I do have some availability coming up to talk about ERP and then schedule, where can we fit, how can we work together.
Perfect. Anybody following the ERP Perspective, like I said, please do reach out to Tim for fractional CIO support, and I'll link his website on this episode and all contact information for Tim as well. But it'd been a pleasure to have you on the ERP Perspective, Tim. And is there anything else that you'd like to give the audience before we finish this episode?
Well, I would say, honestly, George, this ERP podcast is a master class. Go back and listen, watch all the other previous episodes. The ERP Doctor. That one was fantastic. Where did that come from? That was fantastic. I learned. I mean, I've been doing this for 30 years. I learned some stuff. Go back. There are so many good episodes. So anybody listening in this, go back and listen to those. There's some fantastic stuff. And then keep engaging with this. There are multiple avenues to be able to get more information. I think this one specifically is going to be so valuable because it's not connected with any vendor. You're just bringing the goodness focused on the end users and the people that are consuming ERP. So I gotta say, that's probably the best advice I've got for you.
Thank you so much, Tim. And yeah, the ERP Perspective, we're just looking to educate, empower, and unleash the perspective from unbiased people, as many people as possible. We will interview people from vendors in the future, but everybody with a perspective about ERP, because every conversation you can learn something new. Yeah. And I feel like you've educated so many people watching this episode, Tim. So thank you so much for giving the CIO's perspective. And yeah, thank you everyone for watching. And this has been Tim Faith on Composable ERP and the CIO's Perspective.